I thought the hardest thing I would ever have to do was carry my wife's casket on a rainy Tuesday in April. I thought that once the soil settled and the letters of condolence stopped arriving, I had already faced the worst that life could throw at me. For 5 months, I lived in that delusion. I lived in the quiet, hollowed-out version of the life Catherine and I had built over nearly 40 years, moving like a ghost through a house that still smelled of her lavender hand soap and the peppermint tea she drank every night before bed. But I was wrong. The hardest part didn't happen at the funeral. It didn't happen when I received the death certificate that listed her cause of death as a major cerebrovascular accident, a stroke. The real nightmare started on a Tuesday in September, 5 months to the day after she passed, and it started with something as mundane as a pair of broken reading glasses. Catherine was religious about her glasses. She was a woman who lived through her eyes, always reading, always gardening, always observing the world with a sharp, loving clarity. She'd worn the same tortoiseshell frames for years. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to move them. They sat on the corner of her mahogany desk, right next to a half-finished crossword puzzle and a jade plant she'd kept alive for over a decade. I'd walk past that desk every morning, and every morning I'd reach out to touch them, only to pull my hand back at the last second. Touching them made her absence feel too heavy. That afternoon, however, the autumn light caught the frames in a way that made them look dusty. Catherine hated dust. It felt like a betrayal of her memory to leave them there like that. I picked them up, intending to polish the lenses, but as I did, the left hinge gave way with a sickening, metallic snap. The frame split in two in my hands. I sat there on her velvet office chair, clutching the 2 pieces of plastic and wire, and I felt like I had broken the last physical piece of her I had left. I couldn't just throw them away. I wouldn't. Ballard Avenue was quiet for a weekday. The rain had just let up, leaving that sharp, mineral scent that only comes after a Seattle downpour. I parked my car in front of Porter's Optical, a tiny, narrow shop squeezed between a Thai restaurant and a vintage bookstore. Daniel Porter had been a friend of ours for over 20 years. He was an artisan, a man who treated eyewear like fine jewelry. He'd been at the funeral, his face drawn and pale, telling me to call if I ever needed anything. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. Daniel looked up from a display case, his expression shifting from professional warmth to genuine concern the moment he saw me. "James," he said, stepping around the counter. "It's been a while. How are you holding up?" "I've been better, Dan," I said, my voice sounding thin, even to my own ears. I set the broken glasses on the velvet tray on the counter. "I broke them. I was just trying to clean them. And the hinge. I know they're just glasses, but I couldn't let them stay broken." Daniel didn't say a word. He picked up the frames with a practiced, gentle touch, but as he turned them over under the magnifying lamp, his posture changed. He didn't look at the hinge. He looked at the right temple arm, the thick part that sat behind the ear. He pulled a jeweler's loupe from his pocket and pressed it to his eye, leaning so close to the frames that he was almost touching them with his nose. His hands started to tremble. It was subtle, but I saw it. "James," he whispered, his voice suddenly raspy. "When was the last time Catherine brought these in for an adjustment?" "I don't know," I said, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Maybe a year ago." "Why? Is it the frame? Is the plastic degrading?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and pulled the heavy shade down over the glass. My heart began to thud against my ribs. This wasn't how you handled a broken hinge. "Follow me to the back," he said. I followed him past the rows of designer frames into a cluttered workshop filled with the scent of ozone and polishing compound. He cleared a space on his workbench, set the glasses down under a high-intensity LED lamp, and opened his laptop. "I need you to listen to me very carefully, James," Daniel said, not looking up from the screen. "And I need you to stay calm. About 6 months ago, Catherine came to see me. She didn't come for an adjustment. She came with a very specific request. She asked me to order a custom frame from a supplier I usually only deal with for high-security clients. Private investigators, mostly." "What are you talking about, Dan?" He picked up a precision screwdriver and carefully prized a tiny, almost invisible seam along the inner arm of the glasses. Inside, nestled in a hollowed-out cavity that shouldn't have existed, was a micro-circuitry board and a lens no larger than a grain of sand. "These aren't just reading glasses, James," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "This is a high-definition, motion-activated surveillance system. It has a Matrum Term gigabyte internal drive and a battery that draws kinetic energy from the movement of the wearer. She had me swap her old lenses into this frame." I felt the air leave the room. Catherine. My Catherine, who forgot her password to Netflix every other week, was wearing spy equipment. Why? Why would she do that? She wouldn't tell me, Daniel said. She just said she needed to see what happens when she wasn't looking. She made me promise, she made me swear on our friendship that I wouldn't tell you. She said if I told you, it would put you in danger. She told me that if anything ever happened to her, I should wait for you to bring the glasses in. She knew you'd never throw them away. He plugged a proprietary cable into a microscopic port hidden near the hinge and connected it to his laptop. A file directory popped up on the screen. There were dozens of video files, all time-stamped from the final weeks of her life. James, Daniel said, his hand hovering over the mouse. I think you need to sit down. Just play it, Dan, I commanded, though my legs felt like they were made of water. He clicked on a file dated April 14th, the day before she died. The footage was stabilized, crystal clear. It was from the perspective of someone sitting at our kitchen island. I could see the edge of our refrigerator, the bowl of fruit Catherine always kept full of lemons, and the window overlooking the backyard. Then, Ryan walked into the frame. My son, my only child. A 39-year-old civil attorney with a reputation for being the most straight-arrow guy in Seattle. He was wearing his Navy work suit, his tie perfectly knotted. He looked like the man I had spent my life being proud of. He moved with a clinical, terrifying purpose. He didn't look like a son visiting his mother. He looked like a man completing a task. He walked over to the cabinet where Catherine kept her daily vitamins and her blood pressure medication. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic baggie containing 3 white, oblong pills. With steady hands, he opened her vitamin bottle, dropped the white pills inside, and shook the bottle gently so they mixed with the others. He placed the bottle back exactly where it had been, down to the millimeter. He then turned toward the sink, washed his hands, and checked his reflection in the microwave door. He adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and called out, "Hey, Mom, I'm just heading out. Love you." The audio was perfect. I could hear Catherine's voice from the other room, muffled but warm. "Love you too, honey. See you Sunday for dinner?" Ryan didn't answer. He just smirked a cold, jagged expression I had never seen on his face in 39 years and walked out of the house. I stared at the screen, my brain refusing to process what I had just seen. My son had tampered with her medication. The stroke she'd had 14 hours later wasn't an accident. It wasn't a cerebrovascular accident. It was a murder. Daniel paused the video. The silence in the workshop was deafening. "There's more, James," Daniel whispered. "There are audio files of him talking to his wife, Jessica. They're talking about the timeline. They're talking about your life insurance policy." I couldn't breathe. My son hadn't just killed my wife. He was currently in the middle of a plan. "He thinks I'm an easy target," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "He thinks I'm the grieving, distracted old man who's going to sign over the estate any day now." "James," Daniel said, leaning in, his eyes wide with fear. "You need to go to the police, right now." I looked at the broken glasses on the table. Catherine had known. She had lived the last weeks of her life knowing her son was a monster, and she had used her final moments to build a trap for him. She had died to make sure I had the truth. I picked up the pieces of the glasses and tucked them into my pocket. My grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating weight for 5 months, suddenly sharpened into something else. It became a cold, surgical edge. "No," I said, my voice sounding like someone else's. "The police will take too long. Ryan is a lawyer. He knows how to suppress evidence. He knows how to tie things up in discovery for years. If I go to the cops now, he'll know I'm onto him before they even get a warrant." I looked at Daniel. "I need you to copy everything on that drive onto a cloud server I can access. And then I need you to do me one more favor." "Anything," Daniel said. "I need you to fix these glasses, make them look perfect. And then I'm going to go home and invite my son over for dinner." I walked out of the shop and into the darkening Seattle evening. I felt the weight of the hidden camera in my pocket, and for the first time since April, I felt Catherine with me. But she wasn't a memory anymore. She was a partner. I pulled out my phone and dialed Ryan's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice full of that practiced, filial warmth. "Hey Dad, everything okay? I was just about to call you." "I'm fine, Ryan," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. "I was just going through your mother's desk and I found those old glasses of hers. Broke them, actually. I'm feeling a bit sentimental tonight. Why don't you and Jessica come over for dinner? I have some papers I think it's finally time we discussed. Of course, Dad. We'd love to. We'll be there at 7. I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the car window. I didn't recognize the man looking back. I was no longer just a grieving widower. I was the hunter. What Ryan didn't know was that Catherine hadn't just left me a video of her murder. As I walked to my car, I remembered something she'd whispered to me months before she died, something that had made no sense at the time. James, if the light ever goes out, look under the floorboards of the tool shed. Not for money. Or the truth. I realized then that the kitchen video was just the beginning, and Suga Ryan. Ryan thought he was playing a game for an inheritance, but he had no idea that his mother had been 3 steps ahead of him from the very start. I didn't know it yet, but by the time dessert was served tonight, my son would realize that some secrets are buried for a reason, and some people are more dangerous dead than they ever were alive. I stood in our kitchen, and I did something I hadn't done in 5 months. I cooked. I pulled out the heavy Le Creuset pot Catherine used for her boeuf bourguignon, the one with the chipped enamel on the handle. My hands moved with a strange, mechanical precision. Searing the meat, dicing the carrots, deglazing the pan with a splash of burgundy. The familiar smells began to fill the room, but they didn't bring comfort. They felt like a shroud. As I worked, my mind kept drifting back to the Ryan I thought I knew. The golden boy of Ballard. I remembered him at 10 years old, winning the regional spelling bee, how he'd looked at me with such desperate need for approval. I remembered him at 24, graduating from law school, the pride swelling in my chest so thick I could barely breathe. I had spent nearly 4 decades convinced I was the luckiest father in Seattle. I thought I'd raised a man of character, a man of law. But as I stared at the spot on the tile where the paramedics had worked on Catherine, I started to see the cracks I'd ignored for years. There had been signs. Small things. The way Ryan had accidentally let the family dog out when he was 12 because the dog was distracting him from his studies. The cold, analytical way he'd handled his grandmother's estate, prioritizing efficiency over emotion. I'd called it professionalism then. Now, I knew it was something much darker. It was a complete absence of empathy. The sound of a car pulling into the gravel driveway snapped me back to the present. I checked my reflection in the darkened window. I looked like James Mitchell, retired architect, grieving husband. I didn't look like a man who had spent the last 2 hours watching his son commit murder on a loop. "Dad, we're here," Ryan's voice called out as the front door opened. It was a cheerful, resonant sound. "In the kitchen, Ryan," I shouted back, surprised at how steady my voice was. He walked in first, looking every bit the successful attorney in a charcoal cashmere sweater. Behind him was Jessica. She was 10 years younger than Ryan, a former paralegal with a sharp, bird-like beauty and a penchant for expensive jewelry that always seemed just a bit beyond a civil lawyer's salary. Tonight, she was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the kitchen light. I wondered if that bracelet had been bought with the first namui Kongdola Ryan had siphoned from our trust. "Oh, James, it smells wonderful in here," Jessica said, leaning in to give me a stiff, perfumed hug. "But should you be over the stove so much? You look a bit peaked." "Just the heat from the oven, Jessica," I said, smiling at her. "Sit, please. I've missed the company." As we sat down to eat, the performance began. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Ryan spent the first 20 minutes asking about my health, offering to hire a weekly maid service, suggesting he take over the burden of the yard work. He was playing the part of the dutiful son perfectly, but I was watching his eyes. Every time I mentioned Catherine, his gaze would drop to his plate for exactly 3 seconds, a practiced show of grief. Ryan said, setting his wine glass down, "The reason I was so persistent about coming over, Jessica and I have been talking. We're worried about you being in this big house all alone. It's a lot to manage, and with your blood pressure. Well, we saw what happened to Mom. She was fine 1 minute, gone the next," Jessica added, her voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper. "It was such a shock to all of us." "It was," I agreed, taking a slow sip of wine. "Especially considering she'd just had a physical. The doctor said her heart was strong. He couldn't explain why it just stopped." I watched Ryan's hand. He was holding a piece of crusty bread. He didn't flinch, but his grip tightened just enough to crush the crust. "Sometimes the body just gives out, Dad," Ryan said smoothly. "That's why I brought these." He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out its stack of documents. "I've drafted the power of attorney papers we talked about, and the updated will structures. If we get these signed and notarized, I can handle the banking, the taxes, the insurance. You won't have to worry about a thing. You can just focus on healing." He slid the papers across the table. They were neatly tabbed with little yellow "sign here" stickers. I looked at the top page. It wasn't just power of attorney, it was a total transfer of discretionary authority over the Mitchell family trust. He was asking me to hand him the keys to the kingdom. "I'll look these over, Ryan," I said, pushing them to the side. "But I actually found something today that I wanted to ask you about." Ryan's posture didn't change, but the air in the room suddenly felt electric. "Oh? What's that?" "I was in the tool shed today," I lied. I hadn't been in the shed since the funeral, looking for that old level of mine, and I noticed one of the floorboards was loose near Catherine's potting bench. "There's a small metal box under there, locked. Do either of you know anything about it?" The silence that followed was heavy. Jessica looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at me. For a split second, the mask slipped. A flash of genuine, jagged panic crossed his face before he smothered it. "A box?" "No," Ryan said, his voice a fraction higher than before. "Mom kept all her important stuff in the desk or the safe. It's probably just some old gardening seeds or something. I can take a look at it for you before we leave." "No need," I said, waving a hand dismissively. "I couldn't get it open anyway. I'll mess with it tomorrow. Anyway, let's talk about something more pleasant. How's the firm, Ryan? I heard the commercial real estate market has been a bit volatile lately." I watched him spin a lie about a new multi-million-dollar developer client. He was good. If I hadn't seen the video, I would have believed every word. I would have signed those papers. I would have let him take care of me until I, too, had a sudden, unexplained medical event. As the evening wore on, the psychological pressure intensified. Ryan kept circling back to my forgetfulness. He'd mention a conversation we'd supposedly had last week, one that never happened. And when I'd say I didn't remember it, he'd exchange a meaningful look with Jessica. "See, Dad? This is what I'm talking about," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "You're starting to slip. It's the grief. It does things to the memory. It's not safe for you to be handling the finances right now." I realized then that he wasn't just planning to kill me. He was building a legal paper trail of my mental decline. If I died of a stroke or a fall in a few weeks, any investigation would see a son who had been trying to protect a confused, aging father. He was a lawyer, all right. He was litigating my death before it even happened. Around Hong p.m., they finally stood to leave. Ryan gave me a hug, a long, lingering embrace that made my skin crawl. He felt like a snake measuring its prey. "Think about those papers, Dad," he said, standing in the doorway. "I'll stop by Thursday morning. Maybe we can go down to the bank together?" "Thursday sounds fine, Ryan," I said. "Drive safe." I watched their taillights disappear down the street. Then, I didn't go to bed. I didn't go to the kitchen. I grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar from the mood room and headed out to the tool shed in the backyard. The shed was a small, cedar-shingled structure Catherine had used for her roses. It smelled of dried earth and dormant life. I moved the heavy potting bench, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found the loose board Ryan had been so worried about. I pried it up. There was no metal box. Instead, there was a small, waterproof plastic container. Inside was a second pair of glasses identical to the ones Catherine wore every day, and a handwritten note on her personalized stationery. I opened the note, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "James," the note began. "If you are reading this, then you've realized that Ryan isn't the son we thought we raised. I've been watching him for months. I know about the money he's stealing, and I know he's been talking to a man named Marcus. James, Marcus isn't a lawyer. He's a cleaner. If something happens to me, do not trust the police yet. Ryan has a contact in the precinct. Look at the second pair of glasses. I've hidden the master key in the left temple. Use it to open the digital vault I've set up. Everything is there. But James, be careful. He's already started dosing my tea. I can feel my heart racing. I don't think I have much time left. He's coming down the hall now. I love you." The note ended in a jagged scrawl, as if she'd been interrupted. I looked at the second pair of glasses. I felt the left temple. There was a tiny, recessed button. When I pressed it, a small USB connector slid out of the end of the arm. I stood there in the dark shed, the cold Seattle air biting at my neck. Catherine hadn't just recorded one video. She had been running a full-scale counterintelligence operation against her own son, and she'd mentioned a contact in the precinct. Suddenly, the headlights of a car flickered at the end of the driveway. Someone was back. I dropped the floorboard into place and slid the potting bench back just as I heard the faint crunch of footsteps on the gravel. I killed the flashlight and crouched behind a stack of mulch bags, my breath hitching. A shadow passed the window of the shed. It wasn't Ryan. It was a man I'd never seen before, tall, wearing a dark windbreaker, moving with a silent, predatory grace. He didn't go to the front door. He headed straight for the kitchen window, the one Ryan had been looking at during dinner. I realized then that Ryan hadn't just come over for dinner to get me to sign papers. He'd come to mark the house. And he hadn't come alone. I didn't know it yet, but the papers Ryan wanted me to sign weren't for an inheritance. They were a death warrant. And as I watched the stranger peer into my darkened kitchen, I realized that the accidental death Ryan had planned for me wasn't weeks away. It was starting tonight. I crouched there in the dark, my knees screaming against the cold concrete floor of the tool shed, watching through a narrow gap in the siding as the shadow moved across the lawn. The man Marcus, if Catherine's note was right, wasn't a ghost, but he moved like one. He didn't use a flashlight. He navigated by the pale, sickly glow of the streetlights filtering through the pines, his silhouette sharp and efficient. He paused at the kitchen window, the very spot where Ryan had stood earlier, and for a terrifying second, he looked toward the shed. My heart hammered against my ribs so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I gripped the crowbar, my knuckles white, ready to swing at anything that came through that door. But he didn't move toward me. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small device that glinted in the dark, and pressed it against the window frame. A faint, electronic chirp followed. He was bypassing the security system I had installed 3 years ago, the system Ryan had recommended and helped me set up. I realized with a jolt of cold terror that I was a prisoner in my own home before the locks were even turned. The stranger lingered for another minute, checking the side door, then retreated toward the back gate, disappearing into the woods that bordered our property. I didn't move for 10 minutes. I waited until the silence of the night felt heavy again, until the only sound was the distant hum of the Inum. I crept back into the house through the mood room, locking every bolt and drawing every curtain. My hands were shaking as I sat down at my laptop in the study, the second pair of glasses, the master key, resting on the desk like a dormant bomb. I plugged the temple arm into the USB port. My computer didn't recognize it at first. A prompt appeared asking for a multi-digit encryption key. I stared at the screen, frustrated, until I remembered the note. If the light ever goes out. Our wedding anniversary, October Moy Hythe, Motngin Chincham Tamwilam. I typed in Mui Chiu Mocham Hai Mui Motngin Chincham Tamwilam. Nothing. Then I tried her birthday. Nothing. I sat back, rubbing my face. What was the light? Catherine always called Ryan the light of her life. At least she did before the darkness took him. I typed in his birthday. Sao Triu Matrum Bornmui Mortngin Chin Trum Tarmui Bar. The drive clicked open. A flood of files appeared. Catherine hadn't just been recording, she had been a librarian of her own destruction. Folders were labeled by date, bank transfers, the cleaner, the debt, and a final one simply titled, For James. I opened the debt first. It was a PDF of a spreadsheet, but not one from a bank. It was a ledger from a private investment group I'd never heard of. It showed a series of loans made to Jessica Mitchell starting 18 months ago. The interest rates were predatory, the kind of numbers you only see in the underbelly of the world. Jessica hadn't been buying jewelry with our trust money, not at first. She had been chasing a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control at high-stakes poker rooms in the city. Ryan hadn't just been stealing to be greedy, he was stealing to keep his wife from being disappeared by people who didn't care about his law degree. By the time Catherine had found out, they were nearly $1 million in the hole. Ryan had already emptied the liquid assets of the trust, and he was getting desperate. I clicked on an audio file in the cleaner folder. The recording was from a month before Catherine died. It has to be clean, Marcus, Ryan's voice said. He sounded cold, clinical, like he was discussing a real estate closing. She's 62. She takes vitamins every morning. I've already done the research. Potassium chloride. If the dosage is right, it looks like a heart attack or a stroke. The paramedics won't even look for it in someone her age. And the old man? A deep, gravelly voice replied. That had to be the man I saw outside. My father is more complicated, Ryan said. He's healthy. If they both go at once, it's a red flag. We wait. I'll start the paperwork for power of attorney. I'll feed the narrative that he's losing his mind from the grief. People expect a widower to decline. Once he's isolated, we'll stage the accident. A fall down the stairs, Or maybe he leaves the car running in the garage. Whatever works. Just make sure the life insurance is incontestable. I had to put the laptop down. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I thought I would collapse. My son, my little boy, who I'd taught to tie his shoes, was discussing my death as a staged accident for a life insurance payout. He wasn't even angry, he was just efficient. But it was the folder for James that finally broke me. I opened a video file. Catherine was sitting in her office, the very room I was in now. She looked tired, her silver hair slightly unkempt, but her eyes were fierce. "James," she said, speaking directly to the hidden camera in the glasses she was holding. "If you're seeing this, I'm already gone. I know how much this hurts. I know you want to believe there's still good in him, but you have to listen to me. Ryan isn't just in trouble. He's changed. He's become something I don't recognize. He's been working with a man named Marcus Cole, and he has a friend in the Seattle PD, a Detective Miller. If you go to the police, make sure it's not him." She took a shaky breath. "I've been moving our remaining assets to a private account in your name only. The password is in our favorite book, the one we read on our honeymoon. But James, you need to know the most important thing. Ryan didn't just decide to do this. Jessica was. She's the one who found Marcus. She's the one who suggested that I was in the way. They're working together, James. They're a team." I remembered dinner, Jessica's stiff hug, her piqued comment, the way she'd looked at Ryan when I mentioned the box. She wasn't a victim of her addiction. She was the architect of the plan. I looked at the clock. It was Moat. Hong a.m. Thursday morning was less than 30 hours away. That was when Ryan was coming back for the papers. That was when he expected me to hand over the rest of my life. I spent the next few hours downloading everything to 3 separate encrypted drives. I hid one in the mood room, one in the tool shed, and I kept the original master key in my pocket. I knew I couldn't stay in the house, but if I ran, they'd know I knew. Marcus was likely still out there, watching. I decided to play the only card I had left. I needed to see Daniel Porter again, but I couldn't risk a phone call. I knew Ryan had probably mirrored my phone months ago. Every text, every call was likely being routed to him. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, I did something unexpected. I went to the kitchen and made a second pot of coffee. I sat at the island, right where Catherine used to sit, and I stared at the vitamin bottle. I opened it and poured the contents out on the counter. Among the yellow gel caps of fish oil and the brown vitamin D tablets, I saw them. 3 white, oblong pills. He hadn't even waited for the papers. He'd dropped them in tonight during dinner while I was checking the oven. He was moving up the timeline. He didn't want the power of attorney anymore. He wanted the estate settled now. If I took my vitamins this morning, I'd be dead by noon. I didn't flush them. I put them back in the bottle, but I hid the bottle in the back of the pantry and replaced it with an identical one I'd bought weeks ago, but never opened. Then, I did something even more dangerous. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Ryan. "Hey son, I couldn't sleep. Thinking about Mom. I found that key to the metal box in the shed. I'm going to go down there and see if I can get it open this morning. Why don't you come over early? We can open it together." I knew the metal box was his greatest fear. It represented the truth Catherine had warned him about. By dangling it in front of him, I was forcing him to move before he was ready. I was inviting the wolf into the house, but this time, I was the one who had set the trap. I didn't know it yet, but Marcus Cole wasn't just a cleaner, he was a collector. And as I sat there waiting for my son's reply, I realized that Catherine's truth wasn't just about the murder. It was about a secret she'd kept from both of us for 30 years, a secret that would change the very definition of who Ryan Mitchell actually was. A text came back almost instantly. "On my way, Dad. Don't touch anything until I get there. Just stay in the house." I gripped the edge of the counter, the master key burning a hole in my pocket. The game was no longer about survival. It was about justice. And as the sound of a car engine echoed at the end of the driveway, I realized that tonight, the Mitchell family story was finally going to have its ending. The tires of Ryan's black European sedan didn't just roll into the driveway. They bit into the gravel with a frantic, screeching urgency that told me my bait had worked. I watched from the kitchen window, hidden behind the lace curtains Catherine had picked out 3 summers ago. The sun was barely up, a bruised purple light bleeding through the Seattle mist. But Ryan and Jessica were already out of the car before the engine had even fully cut. They looked disheveled. Ryan's hair, usually a perfectly sculpted mane of professional success, was windblown and flat. Jessica was wrapped in a trench coat, her eyes darting toward the tool shed with a predatory hunger. They weren't here to check on a grieving father. They were here to retrieve the one thing that could send them to a cage for the rest of their lives. I opened the back door before they could knock. I made sure to stoop my shoulders just a little more, to let my hand tremble as I held a mug of lukewarm coffee. I needed them to see the victim they expected. "Dad, thank God you're up," Ryan said, his voice tight. He stepped into the kitchen, his eyes immediately scanning the counters, landing briefly on the vitamin bottle I'd moved back to the island. I saw his throat move as he swallowed. He was checking to see if I'd taken the bait, if I'd taken the white pills. "I couldn't sleep, Ryan," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. "I kept thinking about that box. If Catherine went to the trouble of hiding it under the floorboards, it must be important. Maybe it's her jewelry, or her mother's wedding ring." "It's probably just paperwork, James," Jessica said, her voice like a jagged blade wrapped in silk. She didn't look at me. She was already walking toward the mood room. "Let's just get it over with. The air is so damp out here, it's not good for your joints." We walked out to the shed in a grim procession. The mist felt like wet wool against my face. As I led them toward the small cedar structure, I felt a vibration in my pocket. My phone. I didn't look at it, but I knew what it was. I had set a motion sensor alert for the front of the house. Marcus was moving. He wasn't in the woods anymore. He was circling back to the front. Inside the shed, the air was thick with the scent of damp cedar and old potting soil. I pointed to the loose board. "There. It's right under the bench." I tried to pry it up, but my strength isn't what it used to be. Ryan didn't hesitate. He shoved the heavy potting bench aside with a grunt of effort that spoke of his desperation. He dropped to his knees, his expensive wool slacks soaking up the moisture from the floor. He jammed a screwdriver into the gap and heaved. The board flew back, clattering against the wall. Ryan reached into the dark void beneath the joists, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. "There's nothing here," he whispered, his voice rising in pitch. He reached deeper, his arm disappearing up to the elbow. "Dad, there's nothing here but dirt." "That's strange," I said, leaning against the doorframe, blocking their exit. I could have sworn I saw a metal corner. Maybe it shifted? Or maybe someone got to it first. Ryan spun around on his knees, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The golden boy was gone. In his place was a cornered animal. "What are you playing at, Dad? You said you found a box." "You sent me a text saying you had the key." "I did find something, Ryan," I said, and for the first time, I let the confused old man act drop. I stood up straight. I looked him dead in the eye, and I saw the moment he realized the power dynamic had shifted. But it wasn't a box, and it wasn't in the shed. Jessica stepped toward me, her hand reaching into her oversized coat pocket. I saw the outline of something heavy. "James, you're not making sense. The grief is confusing you. Let's go back inside and call your doctor." "The doctor?" I laughed, a cold, dry sound that echoed in the small space. "You mean Dr. Eris? The one you've been paying to update my medical records to show signs of early onset dementia? Or maybe you want to call Detective Miller. I'm sure he'd love to come over and help you manage the scene of my accidental fall." The color drained from Jessica's face. Ryan stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from his knees, his eyes darting toward the door. "I know about the potassium chloride, Ryan," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I know you watched your mother die for 12 minutes while you checked your watch. I know about the $1 million debt to the casino, and I know about Marcus Cole." Ryan took a step toward me, his hands curling into fists. "You don't know anything. You're an old man who's lost his mind. Who's going to believe you? A set of broken glasses and a bunch of nonsense you found under a floorboard?" "I'm not the one who found the most interesting thing, Ryan," I said, pulling the second pair of glasses from my pocket. I held them up like a trophy. "Catherine was the one who found it. She spent months tracking your developer clients. Did you know she followed you to that warehouse in Renton? She saw you meeting with the people Jessica owes money to. She realized you weren't just a victim of her addiction, you were the one who suggested she start gambling in the first place. You wanted a way to bleed the trust dry without me noticing." Ryan's face went through a series of terrifying contortions. Shock, denial, and finally a cold, murderous resolve. "It doesn't matter what she found. She's in the ground, and you're about to join her." "Is that what Marcus is for?" I asked, gesturing toward the door. "He's outside right now, isn't he? Waiting for the signal, waiting to help you stage the suicide of the heartbroken widower." He's a professional, Dad, Ryan said, his voice regaining its clinical edge. He doesn't make mistakes. And unlike you, he understands the value of a clean exit. Then you should probably know one more thing, I said, clicking a button on my phone that was synced to the shed's old, dusty intercom system. I opened the folder labeled, For James, the one Catherine protected with a Muisar digit code, the one that contains the result of the DNA test she ran 3 years ago. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the mist dripping off the cedar eaves. Ryan froze. Jessica looked at him, her eyes wide with a confusion that matched his own. What DNA test? Ryan hissed. You always wondered why you didn't look like me, didn't you? I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Why you were so cold, so calculating, while I was just a builder who liked his gardens. Catherine wondered too. She thought she'd had a miracle when she got pregnant after we were told it was impossible. But 3 years ago, she started getting letters. Extortion letters from a man who knew the truth about a weekend she spent in Portland in Mutngin Chintram Tarmuisar. I watched my son, the man I had raised, the man I had loved more than my own life, crumble. You aren't a Mitchell, Ryan, I said, the truth finally out in the air. You're the son of a man Catherine was terrified of, a man she spent 30 years trying to keep away from us. A man who's currently standing behind you. The door to the shed creaked open. Marcus Cole stepped inside. He didn't look at me. He looked at Ryan. His eyes were the same shape as Ryan's. The same icy blue. The same lack of light. He's lying, Jessica screamed, pulling a small snub-nosed revolver from her pocket. Ryan, he's lying to get in your head. But Ryan wasn't looking at Jessica. He was staring at Marcus. The resemblance was undeniable once the secret was out. It was like looking at a mirror across 20 years of violence. Is it true? Ryan whispered to the stranger. Marcus didn't answer with words. He looked at me, then at the master key in my hand. The girl was right, Ryan. Your mother was a smart woman. She found me months ago. She paid me a lot of money to keep an eye on her son. She knew what you were. She knew the poison was in the blood. She paid you? Ryan gasped. But I hired you. I'm the one who's paying you to kill him. Marcus smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. You're paying me with money you stole from a dead woman. She paid me with the one thing I actually value, the truth. And she made me promise that if you ever tried to hurt James, I'd show you exactly who your real father is. Marcus reached into his jacket, and for a second, I thought he was going for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a heavy, leather-bound ledger, the real version of the one I'd seen on the computer. You're not a lawyer who got in over his head, Ryan, Marcus said, stepping closer. You're just a small-time thief who's about to be discarded. The people you owe money to, they don't want the trust anymore. They want the life insurance. And they don't want to leave any witnesses who can link it back to them. Marcus turned his gaze to Jessica. That includes you, sweetheart. The psychological tension in that tiny shed was suffocating. My son was realizing he was a bastard, his wife was holding a gun she didn't know how to use, and a professional killer was standing between them and the only life they knew. But they didn't know my final move. The light is out, Ryan, I said, echoing Catherine's note. I hit a second button on my phone. Suddenly, the shed was bathed in a blinding, artificial white light. High-intensity floodlights I'd installed under the eaves of the house weeks ago, triggered by my phone. And then came the sound, not the sound of the police, but the sound of Catherine's voice, amplified through the outdoor speakers, playing the recording of Ryan's confession from the glasses. It has to be clean, Marcus. Potassium chloride. The paramedics won't even look for it. The recording blared across the neighborhood, echoing off the trees, a ghostly accusation from a woman who wouldn't stay buried. What are you doing? Ryan screamed, covering his ears. I'm giving the neighbors something to talk about, I said, and I'm giving the police the real police, not your friend Miller, the probable cause they need to enter the property without a warrant. In the distance, the first faint wail of sirens began to climb the hill toward Ballard. Marcus Cole looked at the door, then back at Ryan. He didn't look like a father. He looked like a predator who had just realized the trap was closing on him too. He lunged for me, but Jessica, panicked by the lights and the noise, fired the gun. The bullet didn't hit me. It hit the wooden joist above my head, showering us in splinters. In the chaos, Ryan scrambled for the master key I'd dropped. I'll kill you, Ryan roared, lunging at me. I'll kill you both. Ryan. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. Because as Ryan's hands reached for my throat, I saw something in the doorway that changed everything. A figure was standing there in the blinding white light, a figure I thought I would never see again. I didn't know it yet, but the master key wasn't just a USB drive. It was a trigger for an event Catherine had set in motion the moment she realized her heart was failing, an event that would lead to a final, soul-crushing reversal for the son who thought he had won. The silhouette in the doorway was framed by a halo of white light so intense it felt like the sky itself had descended into my backyard. For a heart-stopping second, Ryan froze, his fingers digging into my windpipe, his face mere inches from mine. I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip, the frantic pulse in his neck, and the sheer, pathetic desperation in his eyes. "Miller?" Ryan gasped, his voice cracking. "Is that you? Get in here." "The old man's gone mental. He's got a recording, Miller. Help me." The figure stepped forward, out of the blinding glare and into the damp, cedar-scented shadows of the shed. It wasn't Detective Miller. It was a woman with a face like etched granite, her dark hair pulled into a tight, professional bun. She held a service weapon with the kind of steady, casual competence that makes your blood run cold. "Detective Hayes, Seattle PD homicide," she said, her voice cutting through the blaring recording of Ryan's confession. Behind her, 3 more officers moved like shadows, their tactical lights sweeping the room, pinning Ryan, Jessica, and Marcus Cole against the walls. "Drop it, Jessica." "Now," Hayes commanded. Jessica, whose hand was still trembling around the small revolver, looked at Ryan, then at the wall of police officers, and finally at Marcus. The biological father she'd just discovered stood perfectly still, his hands raised, his expression one of bored detachment. She let the gun clatter onto the potting bench. Ryan didn't let go of me immediately. He stood there, his hands still locked around my throat, staring at Hayes as if he could litigate his way out of a police raid. "This is a private residence," he hissed, his lawyer's brain frantically trying to find a loophole even as his world collapsed. "You don't have a warrant. This is harassment. My father is suffering from dementia. We don't need a warrant for an active homicide conspiracy caught on a live feed, Mr. Mitchell," Hayes said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a smartphone. On the screen I could see a grainy, wide-angle view of the very shed we were standing in. I felt the pressure on my throat vanish as Ryan's hands fell away. He stared at the phone. "The master key wasn't just a USB drive, Ryan," I said, rubbing my neck, my voice raspy and raw. "It was a cellular-linked transmitter. The moment you broke the floorboard, you triggered a silent alarm and opened a live audio and video bridge to Detective Hayes' task force. She's been listening to every word. She heard about the potassium chloride. She heard you talk about staging my suicide, and she heard your cleaner explain exactly who he is." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant, rhythmic thud of the speakers outside still looping Catherine's final words. Ryan looked at Marcus, then back at me. The realization that he had been outplayed by a woman he'd watched die, a woman he'd dismissed as a slow, aging obstacle, seemed to break something deep inside him. "You think you've won?" Ryan whispered, a jagged, terrifying smile spreading across his face. "You think this ends with a pair of handcuffs?" "I'm a Mitchell. I built this city's legal infrastructure. Miller will have this tossed before the ink is dry on the booking sheet. Miller is currently being stripped of his badge in an interrogation room at the precinct," Hayes said, stepping forward to zip-tie Ryan's wrists. "Your mother didn't just record you, Ryan. She spent the last 6 months of her life building a dossier on every corrupt contact you had. She knew about the warehouse in Renton. She knew about the payoff to the coroner's assistant. She didn't just find the truth, she weaponized it." As the officers began to lead them out, Marcus Cole stopped in front of me. He looked at me with those cold blue eyes, the eyes I had looked at every day for 39 years in my son's face. "She was a hell of a woman, James," Marcus said quietly. "She told me if I ever saw this day I should tell you she was sorry for the lie. She said she did it to give you a son she thought you deserved. She didn't know the rot was already there." The stated, I didn't answer him, I couldn't. I watched them lead the man I had called my son across the lawn in the pouring rain. Ryan was shouting now, screaming about his rights, about his status, about how he was going to destroy me. Jessica was silent, her head bowed, her expensive trench coat dragging in the mud. I stood in the doorway of the shed, the master key heavy in my hand. I felt like I was waking up from a 40-year dream that had turned into a nightmare. "Mr. Mitchell?" Detective Hayes asked, her hand on my shoulder. "We need to get you to the station for a formal statement. We have the car. We have the evidence. It's over." "Not yet," I said. I walked back into the house. The kitchen felt different now. The air was clearer, as if the darkness that had been festering here for months had finally been bled out. I went to the pantry and pulled out the vitamin bottle, the one Ryan had spiked. I handed it to Hayes. "The lab will want this," I said. "And the tea." "He's been dosing the tea since July." I sat at the kitchen island and pulled my laptop toward me. There was one folder I hadn't opened yet, the one labeled "The Developer." As Hayes and her team moved through the house, documenting the scene, I opened the folder. It wasn't just about Ryan's debts or his corrupt friends. It was a series of photos. Catherine had followed Ryan to a construction site downtown, a project our family trust had partially funded. In the photos, Ryan wasn't meeting with developers. He was meeting with a group of men in suits who looked like they belonged in a corporate boardroom, not a casino. I recognized one of them. Arthur Vance, a state senator who had been a regular guest at our Christmas parties for a decade. There were documents attached. Contracts for a special purpose vehicle, a shell company designed to launder money through major municipal infrastructure projects. Ryan hadn't just been stealing to pay off a gambling debt. He had been the lead architect for a massive political embezzlement scheme. I felt a fresh chill. The gambling debt wasn't the motive, it was the leverage. Jessica hadn't just found a gambling habit. She had been used as a pawn to keep Ryan in line. They had both been trapped in a web far larger than a family inheritance, and Catherine had documented it all. Every wire transfer, every meeting, every forged signature. She hadn't just been trying to save me. She had been trying to dismantle a criminal empire that was using our family name as a front. I looked at the final file in the folder. It was a scanned copy of a new will, dated 2 days before she died. I, Catherine Mitchell, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous testaments. I leave the entirety of the Mitchell Trust to a blind legal foundation dedicated to the investigation of municipal corruption. To my husband, James, I leave the house, the memories, and the truth. To my son, Ryan, I leave the silence he worked so hard to create. I realized then why Ryan was so desperate to get me to sign the power of attorney. He didn't just want the money. He needed to stop that foundation from being funded. The moment he realized Catherine had changed the will, her fate was sealed. But he didn't know about the master key. He didn't know that his mother had turned the very tool of his trade, the law, into his executioner. "James?" Hayes called from the living room. "We're ready." I closed the laptop. I looked at the jade plant on the desk. It looked healthy, its green leaves reaching for the morning light. I didn't know it yet, but the ride to the police station was going to be the beginning of a national scandal. Ryan was a small fish in a very big, very dark pond, and his mother had given me the hook. As I walked out of the front door, I saw a black SUV pull up at the end of the driveway. It wasn't a police car. A man in a tailored suit got out, his face obscured by the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't look at the police. He looked directly at me. He raised a hand, 2 fingers pointed like a gun, and then disappeared back into the vehicle. The cleaner might have been arrested, and the son might be in cuffs, but the people Ryan was working for were still out there. And they had just realized that the grieving old man was now the most dangerous witness in the state. I sat in the back of the police cruiser, the rain lashing against the windows. I looked at the master key in my palm. "Detective Hayes?" I said. "Yes, James? Tell the driver to take the long way, and tell your team to stay at the house. We aren't done yet, not by a long shot." I didn't know it then, but the next 72 hours would involve a high-speed chase through the Cascade Mountains, a hidden offshore account worth $40 million, and a final confrontation on a private dock that would force me to choose between my life and the legacy of the woman I loved. The betrayal was visible now. The stakes were at their peak, and for the first time in my life I wasn't an architect building something beautiful. I was a wrecking ball, and I was heading straight for the foundation of everything my son had ever built. The hallway of the Seattle Police Department's West Precinct felt like a tunnel with no end. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. I was flanked by 2 uniformed officers, but I had never felt more vulnerable. Even with Ryan in handcuffs 3 floors below me, the image of that man in the black SUV, the 2 fingers pointed at my chest, stayed burned into my retinas. They put me in an interrogation room, not as a suspect, but for my own safety. It was a small, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and industrial-grade floor wax. Detective Hayes entered 10 minutes later, her face a mask of exhausted fury. She slammed a thick manila folder onto the metal table. "Miller is talking," she said, her voice tight. He's trying to cut a deal, claiming he was just doing favors for Ryan and didn't know about the murder. But it's the other names he's dropping that have my captain looking like he's about to have a stroke. Arthur Vance, I said, the name feeling like a piece of glass in my mouth. Hayes stopped, her eyes narrowing. How did you know? Catherine didn't just record her own murder, detective. She followed the money. She knew Ryan was the bagman for the downtown redevelopment project. She knew the developers were just shells for Vance and his associates. Hayes sat down heavily, leaning her head in her hands. James, I'm going to be straight with you. The moment Vance's name appeared in Miller's statement, the call came down from the commissioner's office. They're trying to move this case to the state attorney general's office. They want to take it out of my hands. They're calling it a conflict of interest because of Miller. I felt the floor drop out from under me. This was the reversal I hadn't prepared for. They're going to bury it, aren't they? If it goes to the state, Vance's people will scrub the evidence. Ryan will get a sweetheart plea deal for manslaughter due to mental distress, and the corruption stays in the dark. I won't let that happen, Hayes whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced. I won't let it happen either, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the master key, the glasses that had started this all. There's a file on here labeled The Dead Man's Switch. Catherine didn't just give me the evidence, she gave me a timer. If I don't enter a secondary code every 24 hours, the entire server, the wire transfers, the photos of Vance, the recordings of the casino bosses, it all goes live to every major news outlet in the Pacific Northwest. I didn't know if such a switch actually existed. I hadn't looked that far into the subfolders yet, but I knew how to read a room, and I knew that in this building, the only way to stay alive was to be too expensive to kill. Hayes looked at the glasses, then at me. You're playing a dangerous game, James. These people don't just sue you, they make you disappear. They already took the only thing I had to lose, I said, thinking of Catherine. Ryan isn't my son. My wife is dead. My home is a crime scene. I'm an old man with nothing but a thumb drive and a grudge. That makes me the most dangerous person Arthur Vance has ever met. Before Hayes could respond, the door to the interrogation room swung open. A man in a sharp, tailored suit stepped in, not an officer, but a lawyer I recognized from the front pages of the Seattle Times. Jonathan Price, the most expensive defense attorney in the state. Detective Hayes, Price said, his voice a smooth, oily baritone. I'm here to represent Mr. Ryan Mitchell, and I've also been retained by the Mitchell Family Trust to oversee the interests of James Mitchell. I didn't hire you, I said, standing up. Your son did, James, Price said, smiling with too many teeth. On your behalf. He's very concerned about your mental state. He's already filed for an emergency conservatorship. He's claiming that your discovery of these recordings is a hallucination brought on by complicated grief. He's suggesting you be moved to a private facility in the Highlands for observation. I looked at Hayes. She was reaching for her radio, but Price held up a hand. Don't, detective. The court order was signed 20 minutes ago by Judge Sterling. It's a temporary emergency directive. James is to be remanded into the care of the medical staff at Silver Oaks immediately. For his own protection. I realized then that Ryan's golden boy intellect was still working, even behind bars. He wasn't trying to beat the murder charge yet. He was trying to delegitimize the witness. If I was declared mentally unfit, Catherine's evidence would be considered the ramblings of a paranoid widower, and the master key would be seized as part of my estate which Ryan would control. He's not going anywhere, Hayes said, her hand on her holster. If you interfere with a court-ordered medical transport, detective, I'll have your badge by lunch, Price said. He turned to me. James, there are 2 orderlies outside. Let's do this the easy way. We just want you to get the help you need. I felt a surge of absolute, freezing calm. This was rock bottom. My own son, the man who shared my name, but none of my blood, was using the law to lobotomize me. I'll go, I said. James. No, Hayes shouted. It's fine, detective, I said, looking her in the eye, trying to send a silent message. If the judge says I need help, I should get help. But I need my glasses. I can't see a thing without them. Price smirked, gesturing to the tortoiseshell frames on the table. Of course, take them. I put the glasses on. The weight of them felt different now. They weren't just a keepsake. They were a weapon. As the 2 orderlies, who looked more like private security contractors than nurses, led me out of the station, I caught a glimpse of Ryan in a holding cell through a cracked door. He was sitting on the bench, his head bowed, looking like the picture of a devastated son. But as I passed, he looked up. He didn't say a word, but he mouthed one. Goodbye. They put me in the back of a black van with tinted windows. Silver Oaks was an hour north, a secluded mansion in the hills where the wealthy went to hide their problem relatives. I knew that once I went behind those gates, I would never come out, but Ryan had made one fatal mistake. He thought I was playing by the rules of the world he knew, the world of courts, filings, and motions. He forgot that I was an architect. I knew how structures were built, and I knew exactly where the load-bearing walls were. As the van cleared the city limits, I pressed the small button on the left temple of the glasses. "Hello, Daniel," I whispered into the microscopic microphone. "James?" "I'm here." Daniel Porter's voice crackled in my ear through the bone conduction speakers. "I'm seeing your GPS coordinates. You're moving north on I-num. What's happening?" "The plan changed, Dan. I need you to trigger the secondary protocol, not the one for the news outlets. The one Catherine labeled the inheritance." "James, are you sure? Once I do that, the money moves. There's no reversing it." "Move it," I said. "Every cent. Send it to the accounts she specified. And Dan, call Marcus Cole's associates. Tell them the contract is officially open, but the target isn't me. It's the man who's about to lose $40 million of their money." I sat back against the leather seat of the van. The orderlies in the front were talking about a football game, oblivious to the fact that I had just pulled the pin on a financial grenade. Catherine hadn't just found the evidence of the embezzlement. She had found the routing numbers for the laundered funds. The $40 million that Arthur Vance and his partners were using to buy the state. By moving that money, I wasn't just stealing it, I was making it look like Ryan had stolen it. If there's one thing people like Arthur Vance hate more than a witness, it's a thief who loses their investment. The reversal was starting. My son wanted to put me in a cage? Fine. I would put him in a shark tank. "We're here," the driver said as we approached a set of massive iron gates tucked into the forest. The gates of Silver Oaks opened slowly. I looked out the window at the beautiful, manicured lawns and the stone facade of the facility. It looked like a tomb. "Welcome home, Mr. Mitchell," the orderly said, opening the van door. I stepped out, the master key firmly on my face. I looked at the security cameras mounted on the stone pillars. I knew that halfway across the state, Arthur Vance's phone was beginning to ring. He was about to find out that his accounts were empty, his bagman was in jail, and the only person who knew where the money went was currently being held in a medical facility he helped fund. The hunter was now the bait, and I was going to make sure that when the sharks arrived, they took everyone down with them. I didn't know it yet, but the next few hours in Silver Oaks would be a game of psychological warfare. I would have to face a doctor who was paid to break my mind, and I would have to find a way to escape a fortress designed to keep the truth in. But as the heavy oak doors of the facility closed behind me, I smiled. Because for the first time since Catherine died, I wasn't afraid. I was the one holding the fuse. The heavy oak doors of Silver Oaks didn't just close. They sealed with a pressurized hiss that told me I was no longer a citizen with rights, but a patient with a price tag. The lobby was beautiful in a sterile, terrifying way, all white marble, pale wood, and the kind of hushed silence you only find in places where people are sent to be forgotten. I was led into a plush office that looked more like a high-end library than a medical clinic. Behind a desk of polished obsidian sat Dr. Aris. He was a man who radiated a calculated, oily benevolence. He looked at me with a pity that was so well rehearsed it made my skin crawl. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice a soothing hum. "I'm Dr. Aris. I've reviewed the emergency directive from Judge Sterling. It seems the last few months have been unimaginably taxing on your psyche. Complicated grief can manifest in many ways: paranoia, the invention of elaborate conspiracies, even the belief that loved ones are out to harm us. Let's skip the preamble, doctor," I said, sitting in the leather chair across from him. I kept my glasses on, the frames feeling like a warm brand against my face. "We both know why I'm here. Ryan paid you to keep me quiet. How much does it cost to gaslight a man into a state-mandated coma? 100,000? 2. Aris didn't blink. He just leaned forward, clicking a silver fountain pen. "You see? This is the paranoia I mentioned. You've constructed a narrative where your son, a respected attorney, is a murderer and a thief. It's a classic defense mechanism, blaming others for the void left by your wife's passing." He gestured to an orderly standing by the door. "We're going to start you on a mild sedative, James, just to help with the agitation. Once you're stabilized, we can begin the real work." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs. "Because in about 5 minutes, your phone is going to ring. And the person on the other end isn't going to be interested in my agitation. They're going to be interested in the $40 million that just vanished from the Vance Redevelopment Fund. Aris paused, his pen hovering over a chart. What did you just say? The money, doctor. The laundered funds Catherine tracked. I triggered a protocol. As of 4 minutes ago, those accounts are empty. The money didn't go back to the state, and it didn't stay in the trust. It moved into a series of untraceable offshore accounts, and the breadcrumbs, they all lead directly to Ryan Mitchell. I smiled, a cold, hard expression that made Aris's professional mask falter. You see, Ryan thinks he's playing a legal game, but the people he's working for, the people who actually fund this facility, they play by different rules. Right now, they think Ryan has stolen their investment. They think he used the murder of his mother as a distraction to pull off the greatest heist in Seattle history. The silence in the office was suddenly heavy. Aris looked at the clock on his wall. Then, as if on cue, his desk phone began to flash. Not a standard ring, but a sharp, urgent staccato. Aris, he hesitated, then picked it up. He didn't speak. He just listened, his face turning the color of ash. Yes, he whispered. He's here. No, I haven't. I understand. He hung up and looked at me, and for the first time, the doctor was gone. He was just a terrified man caught in the middle of a war he hadn't anticipated. What did you do? He hissed. I leveled the playing field, I said. Ryan wanted to isolate me. He wanted me tucked away so he could clean up the mess Catherine left behind. But he forgot that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous architect in the world. I didn't just move the money, Aris. I sent a message to Marcus Cole's associates. I told them that Ryan was planning to turn state's evidence against Vance to save his own skin. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. The people who are coming here now, they aren't coming to check on my health. They're coming to find out where their $40 million went. And if I'm sedated or confused, they're never going to get an answer. Which means they'll start looking for someone else to blame. Someone like the doctor who was supposed to keep things under control. Aris stood up so quickly his chair hit the wall. I'm not part of this. You were a part of it the second you signed that fake medical evaluation. I interrupted. But I'm giving you a way out. Open those iron gates. Let me walk out of here. If I'm free, I can fix the money trail. I can make it look like the transfer failed. I can buy you enough time to disappear before Arthur Vance realizes you're a liability. The open loop I'd left for him was irresistible. Aris was a shark, but he was a small one, and he knew it. He looked at the door, then back at me. They'll kill me, he whispered. They'll definitely kill you if I stay here, I said. But if I leave, I'm the target. You just get to be the doctor who was overpowered by a desperate patient. Aris looked at the orderly who was watching us with wide eyes. Get him out. Use the service entrance. And James, if I ever see you again, I'll kill you myself. You'd have to get in line, doctor, I said. The escape was a blur of gray concrete and wet forest air. The orderly led me through a series of service tunnels, the architectural veins of the mansion I had mapped out in my head the second I saw the blueprints on Aris's desk. We emerged near the back of the property, where a nondescript sedan was waiting. Daniel? I asked as I approached the car. The window rolled down. It wasn't Daniel. It was Marcus Cole. Get in, James, the cleaner said, his voice as steady as a heartbeat. We have a lot to talk about, and very little time to do it. I hesitated for only a second. I didn't trust the man who was Ryan's biological father, but I knew he was the only one who understood the monsters we were fighting. I got in. Where's Daniel? I asked as we tore down the winding mountain road, the tires screaming on the damp asphalt. Safe, Marcus said. I had my people move him. Vance's team went to the optical shop 20 minutes after you moved the money. They burned it to the ground, James. They're not playing legal games anymore. I felt a pang of guilt for Daniel, but Marcus kept talking. Ryan is being moved from the precinct to the county jail, but he's not going to make it there. Vance has a team intercepted the transport. They're going to liquidate the witness and the thief in one go. They think Ryan has the money, but he doesn't, I said. Joe. Exactly, Marcus said, a grim smile touching his lips. Which is why we're going to the one place they'd never expect us to go. Where? To the warehouse in Renton, Marcus said. The one Catherine photographed. It's not just a meeting place, James. It's where Vance keeps the ledger, the real one. The physical backup that proves every bribe, every kickback, and every murder they've ordered for the last 20 years. I looked out at the rain-slicked trees flying past. I had reached rock bottom, I was a fugitive, my friend's business was in ashes, and my son was about to be murdered by his own business partners. But as I touched the master key in my pocket, I realized that the collapse was finally complete. Everything I had built, my family, my reputation, my peace was gone, and in its place was a singular, burning purpose. "If we go there, we won't get out," I said. "Maybe not," Marcus agreed, "but we'll make sure nobody else does either." We were 10 miles from Renton when the first black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, then a second. They didn't have sirens. They didn't have police markings. They just had the cold, relentless speed of professional hunters. "Hold on," Marcus said, floorboarded the pedal. The chase through the industrial backroads was a chaotic symphony of metal and spray. We were being pushed toward the waterfront, toward the very warehouse where Catherine had seen the beginning of the end. I didn't know it yet, but the master key had one final function I hadn't discovered. A function Catherine had built in for this exact moment, the moment when the truth was no longer enough, and only a total reversal of the world could save what was left of me. As we screeched toward the heavy iron doors of the warehouse, Marcus handed me a heavy, cold object. A weapon. "I don't use these," I said. "You're an architect, James," Marcus said, checking his own sidearm. "Think of it as a tool for a very specific kind of demolition." We hit the doors at 60 miles an hour. The glass shattered, the metal groaned, and we skidded into the dark, echoing belly of the beast. I climbed out of the wreckage, my ears ringing, the smell of burnt rubber and oil filling my lungs. I looked around the vast, shadowy space. This was it, the center of the rot. And then, from the shadows of the upper gantry, a voice called out, a voice I would have known anywhere. "Dad, is that you? Please, you have to help me." It was Ryan. He was tied to a chair in the middle of the floor, his face beaten and bloodied, a single spotlight illuminating him like a doomed actor on a stage. And standing behind him, his hand on Ryan's shoulder, was Arthur Vance. "Hello, James," the senator said, his voice echoing through the rafters. "I believe you have something of mine, and I believe I have something of yours. Shall we discuss the rate of exchange?" I stood in the center of the warehouse, the master key on my face, a gun in my hand, and the ghosts of my family at my back. I was at the end of the story. But as I looked at the man I had raised, I realized the final twist wasn't about the money or the murder. It was about the one thing Arthur Vance hadn't counted on. I looked at the timer on my glasses. 0. "The exchange rate just went to 0, Arthur," I said. And then, the warehouse went dark. The darkness wasn't empty. It was heavy, textured with the smell of old grease and the sudden, frantic breathing of men who had spent their lives hiding in the shadows, only to realize they were no longer the ones in control. In the absolute void of the warehouse, my other senses sharpened to a jagged edge. I could hear the rustle of Arthur Vance's expensive silk suit as he shifted, the metallic click of a safety being disengaged, and the low, guttering sob coming from the chair where Ryan was tied. "James," Vance roared, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel walls, stripped of its senatorial polish. "You think a blackout changes anything? My men have night vision. We have the exits. You're just a man standing in a graveyard you built for yourself." He was lying. I knew he was lying because I'd felt the vibration in my glasses, the master key, the moment the timer hit 0. It wasn't just a power cut. Catherine hadn't just taught me how to find the truth. She taught me how to dismantle a structure from the inside out. The override had triggered a localized electromagnetic surge through the warehouse's smart grid, frying every electronic device within 50 yards. Their radios were dead. Their high-tech optics were useless. Even the digital locks on the doors had defaulted to a hard seal. I didn't need a gun. I needed the architecture. "I didn't build this graveyard, Arthur," I said, my voice projecting from a corner I'd already moved away from. "Catherine did. She spent 40 years watching me design buildings, learning how to read blueprints, understanding that every structure has a pressure point. You think you're holding the leverage? You're standing on a trapdoor, and I'm the only one with the key." I moved silently through the dark, my hand trailing along a row of heavy shipping crates. I knew this layout. I'd studied the Renton redevelopment plans. In the secret folder, I knew that 12 feet to my left was the main override for the fire suppression system. "Dad, please." Ryan's voice was a high, thin wail. "Tell him where the money is. Just give it back. I'll do whatever you want. I'll testify. I'll tell them Jessica did it all. Just don't let them kill me." It was the most honest thing Ryan had ever said. Even at the end, he was willing to trade his wife, his mother's memory, and his father's life for one more day of breathing. The rot in the blood Marcus had mentioned wasn't just a metaphor. It was a complete and utter lack of soul. "The money is gone, Ryan," I said, nearing the control panel. "It's not in an offshore account. It didn't go to a charity. I sent it to the one place Arthur Vance can never get it back from." I initiated a direct, anonymous wire to the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division, labeled as a voluntary disclosure of laundered state funds. By tomorrow morning, the federal government will have 40 million pieces of evidence against every man in this room. A roar of rage erupted from the gantry. A muzzle flash lit up the dark, a split second of orange light followed by the deafening crack of a gunshot. The bullet punched through a crate inches from my head. "Kill him," Vance screamed. "Kill them both." But Marcus Cole was already moving. I didn't see him, but I heard the results. A sickening thud, a sharp cry of pain, and the sound of a body hitting the concrete floor. Marcus wasn't a father protecting a son. He was an apex predator cleaning a mess. He was the dark mirror of what Ryan could have been if he'd had a shred of courage. I reached the panel and pulled the manual lever. Suddenly, the warehouse wasn't dark anymore. It was filled with a torrential downpour of fire suppression foam and freezing water. The high-pressure nozzles hissed like 1,000 snakes, turning the air into a thick, white mist that blinded everyone. In the chaos, I moved toward the center of the floor, toward the spotlight that was now just a dim glow in the fog. I found the chair. Ryan was thrashing, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his face a ruin of bruises and fear. I didn't untie him. System and pieces. I stood over him, the water soaking through my jacket, and I looked at the man I had loved for nearly 40 years. "Why, Ryan?" I asked, the words barely a whisper under the roar of the water. "We gave you everything. We loved you. We would have died for you." Ryan looked up at me, and for a second, the fear vanished, replaced by a cold, searing resentment. "You gave me a life of mediocrity." He spat, coughing as the foam filled his mouth. "You were just a builder, Dad. A man who got excited about crown molding and foundation depths. I was meant for more than this city. I was meant for the kind of power Vance has. Mom saw it. She saw I was different. She tried to smother me with her morality and her rules. She deserved what she got for trying to keep me small." I felt the final string of my heart snap. There was no grief left, no regret, just a profound, hollow clarity. "She didn't try to keep you small, Ryan," I said. "She tried to keep you human. And when she realized it was too late, she made sure you'd never be able to hurt anyone else." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the master key one last time. I didn't use the USB. I snapped the frames in half, just like I had that first day in the office. Inside the hollowed-out temple arm, nestled beneath the electronics, was a small, gold-plated key. It was the physical key to a safe deposit box Catherine had kept at the bank we'd visited every Saturday for decades. "This is the real inheritance, Ryan," I said, showing it to him. "It's not money. It's a letter Catherine wrote to you 20 years ago. She knew even then. She'd seen the way you looked at the world. She left you a way back, a confession, and a path to redemption. But you were so busy looking for a payday that you never looked for her heart." I dropped the key into the rising water and foam at his feet. "The police are 5 minutes away, Ryan. Detective Hayes has the perimeter. Vance's men are down. And the $40 million? It's already being flagged by the feds." I turned to walk away. "Dad, you can't leave me here. They'll kill me. The people Vance works for. They'll find me in prison." "I'm not your father, Ryan," I said, not looking back. "I'm just the man who built the house you burned down. You'll have plenty of time to get to know your real father. I believe Marcus is still somewhere in the dark." I walked toward the exit, my path illuminated by the flickering emergency lights that were finally struggling to life. I found Marcus Cole standing near the shattered doors. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were calm. "The ledger is in the car, James," Marcus said. "Vance is unconscious on the gantry. The rest of them ran. You should go before Hayes gets here. I'll take the heat for the warehouse." "Why?" I asked. Marcus looked back into the mist, toward the son he'd never known. "Because she was right. The rot is in the blood. But you? You're the only thing in this story that isn't broken. Go home, James. Live the life she bought for you." I didn't argue. I walked out into the cool Seattle night. The rain had returned, a gentle, cleansing drizzle that washed the foam and the grime from my skin. I didn't go to the police station. I didn't go to a hotel. I drove to the waterfront, to the spot where Catherine and I used to sit and watch the ferries. I sat there until the sun began to peek over the Olympics. a pale gold light that made the water look like hammered silver. I pulled out my phone and deleted the hidden folders. I deleted the recordings. I deleted the evidence. The feds had the money trail, and Hayes had the confession. My work was done. 2 years later, I sit in a small house on the coast of Oregon. It's not an architectural marvel. It's a simple cottage with a wide porch and a garden that's finally starting to thrive. The Mitchell scandal has long since faded from the headlines. Arthur Vance is serving 30 years. Ryan is in a maximum security facility where he'll stay for the rest of his life, safe from Vance's reach but haunted by the silence. Jessica disappeared shortly after the trial. Some say she's in Europe. Others say she didn't make it past the first month of hiding. I don't look for them. I don't look for the truth anymore. I spend my mornings in the garden and my evenings reading by the fire. Sometimes, I put on a pair of tortoiseshell reading glasses, not the ones with the cameras, but a simple pair I bought at a shop in town. They don't have a master key. They don't have a hidden drive. But when I look through them, I see the world the way Catherine did. I see the beauty in the small things. The way the light catches the dew on a rose. The way the tide always comes back, no matter how much it's been pushed away. The moral of my story isn't about revenge. It isn't about the $40 million or the high-speed chases. It's about the fact that love isn't a structure you build once and leave alone. It's a living thing that requires maintenance, honesty, and sometimes a devastating demolition to save the foundation. Ryan thought he could inherit a life he didn't earn. He thought he could kill the past and keep the profit. But you can't build a future on a hollow foundation. I miss her every day. But as I sit here on this porch, watching the sun set over the Pacific, I know that I'm not alone. I have the house, the memories, and finally, the truth. And for a man who lost everything, I've realized that's more than enough. If there's one thing you take from this, let it be this. Don't wait for the light to go out to look for the truth. Some secrets are meant to be shared, and some people are worth saving before the darkness takes them. My name is James Mitchell. I was an architect. Now I'm just a man who knows that even the most broken life can be rebuilt, one stone at a time. What about you? If you were holding the master key to your family's deepest secrets, would you have the courage to turn it?